The amber sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the weathered planks of Sarah McKenna's front porch. Dust motes danced in the dying light, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called its lonesome song. Sarah sat in her late husband's rocking chair, her calloused hands folded over a letter she couldn't bring herself to open. The bank seal stared back at her like an accusation. 3 months had passed since Thomas died in the mine collapse, and the world seemed to have forgotten that Sarah McKenna existed. The general store owner nodded politely when she came to town, but his eyes held the cold calculation of unpaid debts. The neighbors who once brought casseroles and kind words had drifted away like tumbleweeds, leaving her alone with her grief and her crumbling homestead. The sound of hoofbeats broke through her reverie. Sarah looked up to see a lone rider approaching, his silhouette dark against the crimson sky. He sat tall in his saddle, weathered hat pulled low, but there was something gentle in the way he urged his horse forward, as if he were afraid of disturbing the evening's peace. Jake Sullivan had been riding the trails for near 20 years, carrying mail and messages between settlements that civilization had forgotten. His face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much sun and not enough kindness, but his eyes still held a spark of something that refused to be extinguished. He had ridden past the McKenna place many times before, always noting the tidy garden and the smoke rising from the chimney. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, the house seemed to exhale sorrow. "Evening, ma'am," Jake called out, touching the brim of his hat as he reined in his horse. "Jake Sullivan. I carry mail for the territory. Got something here with your name on it." Sarah's heart clenched. More bills, most likely. More reminders of how far behind she was falling. But something in the stranger's voice made her look up, really look at him. His face was kind, creased with laugh lines despite the hardship written in his weathered features. "I'm Sarah McKenna," she said, rising from the chair. "Though I'm not sure anything good ever comes in letters these days." Jake dismounted slowly, his joints protesting the long day's ride. "Well, ma'am, I've learned that sometimes the worst-looking storms bring the rain that saves the crops. Might be this letter's got some sunshine hiding in it." There was something about his voice, warm and unhurried, that made Sarah's shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. When was the last time someone had spoken to her without pity or impatience in their tone? Jake pulled a weathered envelope from his saddlebags, but instead of handing it over immediately, he paused. "Ma'am, I don't mean to impose, but my horse here's been carrying me since dawn, and that water trough of yours looks mighty inviting. Mind if I water him before I ride on?" Sarah nodded, grateful for the delay. "Of course. There's a well pump right there. Help yourself." As Jake led his horse to the trough, Sarah found herself studying him. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, talking softly to his animal as he worked the pump handle. The horse nuzzled his shoulder affectionately, and Jake chuckled, a sound that seemed to chase away some of the evening's melancholy. "Fine animal you have there," Sarah observed, stepping closer despite herself. "Old Dusty here. He's been my partner longer than most marriages last." Jake stroked the horse's neck with genuine fondness. "Saved my life more times than I can count. Once, down near the Rio Grande, we got caught in a flash flood. Dusty here swam us both to safety. Wouldn't give up even when I thought we were goners." The way he told the story, with quiet humor and obvious affection for his horse, made Sarah smile. She couldn't remember the last time she had smiled, really smiled, and the unfamiliar expression felt strange on her face. "You must have seen a lot of country in your travels," she said, settling back into the rocking chair. Jake nodded, finishing with his horse before turning back to her. "Yes, ma'am. From the Mexican border to the Canadian territories, every settlement, every lonely ranch, every place where folks are trying to carve out a life from this hard land. Sounds like lonely work." "It can be," Jake admitted, leaning against the porch railing. "But there's beauty in it too. Sunrises over the mountains that take your breath away. People who'll share their last cup of coffee with a stranger. Stories that deserve to be told." Something in his voice made Sarah look at him more carefully. "You collect stories?" Jake's eyes twinkled. "I suppose I do. When you spend most of your time alone on the trail, you learn to treasure the moments when folks open up and share a piece of themselves. Every person's got a story worth telling, ma'am. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time someone had suggested she might be interesting? Thomas used to say she was too quiet, too bookish. The townspeople treated her like a responsibility at best, an inconvenience at worst. The twilight deepened around them, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Jake made no move to leave, and Sarah found herself reluctant to send him on his way. There was something peaceful about his presence, like sitting near a warm fire on a cold night. "Tell me one," she said suddenly. "A story." Jake's eyebrows rose. "Ma'am, you said everyone has a story. Tell me one of yours." Jake settled more comfortably against the railing, his eyes growing distant. "Well, there was this one time, up in Colorado Territory. I came across a little Arapaho girl, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wandering alone in a snowstorm. Half frozen, she was, and scared out of her mind." Sarah leaned forward, drawn in despite herself. Turned out her village had been attacked by raiders, not soldiers, just bandits looking for easy pickings. They'd killed her parents and scattered the tribe. This little one had been hiding in the woods for 3 days. Jake's voice grew soft with memory. "I wrapped her in my coat and shared what food I had. Didn't speak a word of English, but she had these big brown eyes that seemed to look right through to your soul. What did you do?" "Well, I couldn't just leave her there to die, so I took her with me. Spent 2 weeks tracking down what was left of her tribe. Finally found her grandmother camped near a frozen creek, half dead with worry." Jake smiled at the memory. "When that old woman saw her granddaughter alive and well, she cried like I'd brought her back from the dead." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That must have felt wonderful." "It did. But here's the thing, ma'am. Before I left, that grandmother pressed something into my hands. A small leather pouch. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Thought it might be some trinket, you know. Didn't look inside until I made camp that night." "What was it?" Jake reached into his vest and pulled out a small, worn leather bag. "Gold dust. Enough to keep me fed and sheltered for 6 months. But more than that." He opened the pouch carefully, revealing a small carved figure. She'd made this. A little horse and rider. Said it would bring me safe travels and true friendship wherever I went. Sarah reached out to touch the carving, her fingers brushing Jake's palm. The contact sent an unexpected warmth up her arm. "It's beautiful. I've carried it ever since. And you know what? I've never wanted for food or shelter. Never been without a friend when I needed one most." Jake's eyes met hers. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness come back to you in ways you never expected." The story settled between them like a shared secret. Sarah found herself thinking about kindness, about the way this stranger had watered his horse slowly, taking time to talk to a lonely woman when he could have simply delivered his letter and ridden on. A coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, and Sarah shivered slightly. Without thinking, Jake shrugged out of his worn leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of trail dust and wood smoke and something indefinably masculine that made her breath catch. "You don't have to," she began. "Ma'am, my mother would tan my hide if she knew I let a lady sit cold while I stayed warm." Jake's grin was boyish despite the lines around his eyes. "Besides, I've got another story, if you're willing to hear it." Sarah pulled the jacket closer around her shoulders and nodded. She couldn't remember the last time she'd wanted to hear anything as much as she wanted to hear Jake Sullivan's voice spinning tales in the gathering darkness. "This one happened down in Texas, near San Antonio. I was carrying dispatches between the army posts, and I stopped at this little mission that had been converted into an orphanage, run by a nun, Sister Catherine, who couldn't have been much older than you." The wind picked up, rustling through the cottonwoods that lined the creek. Jake's voice took on the cadence of a born storyteller, painting pictures with his words. Sister Catherine had about 20 children under her care, all of them orphaned by the war or by Indian raids, or just by the hard luck that seems to follow folks out here. She was trying to feed them on nothing but faith and stubbornness, and doing a poor job of both. "Poor thing," Sarah murmured. "That's what I thought too." Place was falling down around their ears, children wearing clothes that were more patch than original fabric. But those kids loved her something fierce, and she loved them right back. You could see it in the way she tucked them in at night, the way she saved the best bits of food for the littlest ones. Jake paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. In the silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sound of the creek running over stones. "Well, I only meant to water my horse and move on. But something about the place got to me. Maybe it was seeing Sister Catherine trying to fix a broken window with nothing but paper and prayer. So I stayed the night, helped patch a few things, told the children stories around their meager fire. They must have loved that. They did. But here's the thing that still amazes me, ma'am. When I got ready to leave the next morning, Sister Catherine pressed $2 silver into my hand. Said it was for the stories, for bringing a little joy into their lives. $2 silver she couldn't spare, that those children needed for food. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She knew about sacrifice, about giving when you had nothing left to give. I tried to give the money back, Jake continued, but she wouldn't hear of it. Said joy was worth more than silver, and anyone who could make children laugh in hard times deserved to be rewarded. He shook his head, still marveling at the memory. So I took those $2 silver and rode on. But something about that place haunted me. A barn owl called from somewhere in the darkness, its voice ethereal and lonely. Sarah found herself leaning forward, caught up in the story despite herself. About 6 months later, I found myself back in San Antonio. Had some extra time, so I decided to ride out to the mission, see how Sister Catherine and the children were faring. Jake's voice grew quiet. What I found there nearly broke my heart. What happened? The mission had burned down. Lightning strike during a summer storm. Sister Catherine and the children had lost everything. Their beds, their clothes, what little food they had stored up. They were living in a makeshift camp by the river, nothing but canvas and prayer keeping them alive. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth. Those poor babies. That's when I knew what those $2 silver were meant for, Jake said softly. I rode straight back to San Antonio and started talking to folks. Told them about Sister Catherine, about 20 orphan children who needed help. Used those $2 silver to buy the first supplies, blankets and flour and milk for the littlest ones. The rocking chair creaked gently as Sarah swayed, caught up in the tale. Jake's voice had taken on a hypnotic quality, painting pictures in the darkness. But here's the miracle, ma'am. Word spread through San Antonio like wildfire. Seems Sister Catherine had touched more lives than she knew. A banker whose son she'd nursed through scarlet fever donated lumber. A rancher whose daughter she'd taught to read sent cattle. A seamstress whose nephew was one of her orphans organized the church ladies to sew new clothes. And the mission? They built a new one, bigger and stronger than before, with a real school and dormitories and a garden that could feed 50 children. All because a good woman gave $2 silver she couldn't afford to a storytelling stranger. Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks now, and she didn't try to hide them. That's beautiful, Jake. What's beautiful, ma'am, is how kindness multiplies, like ripples in a pond, spreading out farther than you can see. Jake's voice grew gentle. Sister Catherine's $2 silver became a new home for 20 children, and it all started because she recognized that joy, real joy, is worth more than silver. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the night sounds of the prairie and the soft creak of the rocking chair. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, feeling something tight in her chest beginning to loosen. You have a gift, Sarah said quietly. The way you tell stories. It's like watching them happen. Jake ducked his head, suddenly shy. My grandmother always said I had the Irish gift of gab. Never knew if that was a compliment or a complaint. Sarah laughed, the sound surprising them both. It had been so long since she'd laughed that she'd almost forgotten how it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. There it is, Jake said softly. What? Your laugh? It's like music. Like wind chimes on a summer evening. His words made Sarah blush in the darkness. Ma'am, would it be too forward of me to say that you have a beautiful laugh? Sarah's hand fluttered to her throat self-consciously. Thomas had never called her laugh beautiful. He'd barely seemed to notice when she laughed at all. I haven't had much reason to laugh lately, she admitted. Jake's expression grew serious. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I heard about your husband in town. Mine accidents are a hard way to lose someone. The familiar weight of grief settled on Sarah's shoulders, but somehow it felt less crushing than usual. Maybe it was Jake's presence, or the lingering warmth of his stories, but the pain felt bearable tonight. 22 years we were married, she said. He was a good man, worked hard, but... She trailed off, not sure how to voice the loneliness that had existed even when Thomas was alive. But, Jake prompted gently, he wasn't much for talking, or stories. Said I read too many books, lived too much in my imagination. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. I used to tell him about the books I was reading, but he'd just grunt and go back to his newspaper. After a while I stopped trying. Jake was quiet for a long moment. A woman with imagination is a treasure, he said finally. Someone who can see beyond what's right in front of her. Who can dream of better things? That's a rare gift. Is it? Sarah's voice was wistful. It island takes imagination to see a burned-down mission and envision it rebuilt. Takes imagination to look at a scared little girl in a snowstorm and see her safe with her grandmother. Takes imagination to. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. To look at a lonely woman on a porch and see someone worth talking to, worth listening to. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Sarah felt her heart beating faster, and she was grateful for the darkness that hid her burning cheeks. That letter, Jake said suddenly, as if remembering why he'd come. Maybe it's time to see what it says. Sarah had forgotten about the envelope, still clutched in her other hand. The bank's seal seemed less ominous now, somehow. With trembling fingers, Sarah broke the seal and unfolded the letter. Jake struck a match, holding it up so she could read by its flickering light. The formal language of the bank seemed cold and impersonal after Jake's warm stories, but as Sarah read, her eyes widened. "I don't understand," she whispered. "What is it, ma'am?" Sarah read the letter again, her voice growing stronger. It says Thomas had a life insurance policy through the mine. I never knew about it, they're saying." She looked up at Jake, her eyes wide with disbelief. $500. They're sending me $500. Jake's face broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be damned, pardon my language, ma'am. That's wonderful news." "It is, isn't it?" Sarah felt a laugh bubbling up inside her, different from before, lighter, filled with relief and possibility. "I can pay off the debts, fix the roof, maybe even expand the garden." "You could do anything you wanted," Jake agreed. "That's enough money to give you choices." Choices. Sarah rolled the word around in her mind like a precious stone. When was the last time she'd had choices? "There's something else," she said, scanning the letter again. "They want to offer me a position keeping books for the mine office. Says they need someone who can read and write well, someone trustworthy." Jake's smile grew even broader. "Sounds like they know a good woman when they see one." Sarah folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest. "I can't believe it. This morning I thought I might lose everything." "Sometimes," Jake said quietly, "when everything seems darkest, that's when the light starts to shine through, like dawn after the longest night." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear prairie sky. Sarah felt as if the whole world had shifted while they sat talking, as if she'd stepped from one life into another simply by opening a letter and listening to stories. "Jake," she said finally, "why did you stay? You could have just handed me the letter and ridden on. You didn't have to spend your evening listening to a widow feel sorry for herself." Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she'd overstepped. But finally, he spoke. "Because you reminded me of someone," he said softly. "Who?" "My mother. She died when I was 15, and my father, well, he took to drink after that. Left me to fend for myself." Jake's voice carried old pain, carefully controlled. "But before she died, my mother used to sit on our porch just like this, especially after a hard day. She'd rock in her chair and watch the sunset, and sometimes she'd cry a little when she thought no one was looking." Sarah's heart clenched with sympathy. "I used to wonder what she was thinking about, sitting there so quiet and sad. After she was gone, I wished I'd sat with her more, asked her to share her thoughts, maybe told her a story or two to make her smile." "Oh, Jake, so when I saw you sitting here tonight, looking so alone, I guess I wanted to do for you what I never got the chance to do for her." Jake cleared his throat roughly. "Besides, you've got the most beautiful laugh I've heard in 20 years of traveling. Seems a shame to let something that precious go to waste." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, but these were different, warm and healing rather than bitter. "Your mother raised a good man." Jake Sullivan. "I hope so, ma'am. I surely do hope so." A thought struck Sarah suddenly, and she turned to face him fully. "Jake, where are you headed next?" "Well, I've got mail to deliver up in Bent Creek, about 2 days' ride north. After that." He shrugged. "Wherever the mail route takes me, I suppose." "How often does your route bring you through Willow Creek?" Jake seemed to consider this carefully. "Usually about once a month, sometimes more if there's a lot of correspondence to carry." Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Would you? That is, if you're ever passing through and have time, would you like to stop for supper sometime? I could cook a proper meal, and we could," she faltered, suddenly shy. "Share more stories?" Jake finished gently. Yes. That is, if you wouldn't mind the company of a simple widow woman. Jake stood up slowly, moving to kneel beside her chair. In the starlight, his weathered face was gentle and kind. Ma'am, there is nothing simple about you. You're a woman with imagination, with kindness enough to offer hospitality to a stranger, with strength enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. Any man would be honored by your company. Sarah's breath caught. Jake, Mrs. McKenna, I want you to know something. His voice was serious now, formal. In 20 years of carrying mail across this territory, I've met a lot of people, rich ones and poor ones, young ones and old ones. But I've never met anyone who made me want to stay put, want to stop wandering. He paused, seeming to search for words. Until tonight, the words hung between them like a promise, fragile and precious. Sarah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you'll have me, I'd like to make Willow Creek a more regular stop, maybe find reasons to come through more than once a month. Jake's eyes searched hers in the darkness. I'm saying that your laugh is the prettiest sound I've heard in 2 decades, and I'd like to spend whatever time you'll give me trying to earn it. Sarah's hand found his where it rested on the arm of the chair. His skin was rough and warm, calloused from years of holding reins and handling mail sacks. I'd like that, she whispered. I'd like that very much. Jake lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then it settled. I'll be back in 2 weeks, if that suits you. 2 weeks, Sarah repeated, already counting the days. Jake stood, reluctantly releasing her hand. I should let you get some rest, ma'am. It's been a long day, and tomorrow you'll want to start making plans for your new beginning. Sarah rose as well, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Jake, wait. She shrugged out of his jacket, holding it out to him. You'll need this. It gets cold on the trail. But Jake shook his head. You keep it for now. Something to remember this evening by. His smile was crooked and boyish. Besides, it gives me a good reason to come back for it. Sarah clutched the jacket to her chest, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke and adventure. Thank you. For everything. For the stories. For listening. For what? For reminding me that I'm more than just my grief. For making me remember how to laugh. Jake tipped his hat. Thank you, Sarah McKenna, for reminding me why I started telling stories in the first place. They're meant to be shared. He swung up into his saddle with practiced ease, but Dusty seemed reluctant to leave the comfortable trough and the peaceful atmosphere of the homestead. 2 weeks, Jake called softly as he turned his horse toward the road. 2 weeks, Sarah called back, standing on her porch and watching him ride into the darkness. Long after the sound of hoofbeats had faded, Sarah remained on the porch, wrapped in Jake's jacket and holding the letter that had changed everything. The night was full of possibilities now, full of hope and the promise of laughter. She thought about Jake's stories, about Sister Catherine and the little Arapaho girl, about kindness that multiplied like ripples in a pond. Tonight, she had shown kindness to a stranger, offering him water for his horse and a willing ear for his tales. In return, she had received far more than she had given: laughter, hope, and the promise of companionship. Maybe, she thought as she finally went inside, maybe Jake was right about the smallest acts of kindness coming back in unexpected ways. After all, if she hadn't offered him water, would he have stayed to talk? If she hadn't listened to his stories, would he have stayed long enough for her to read the letter that changed everything? As she prepared for bed, Sarah found herself humming something she hadn't done since Thomas died. The sound surprised her, but it felt right, like a rusty instrument finding its voice again. 2 weeks. She would have 2 weeks to plan her new life, to decide what she wanted to do with her unexpected windfall and her new job. 2 weeks to practice laughing, to remember how to hope, and at the end of those 2 weeks, Jake Sullivan would ride back into her life with more stories, and that crooked smile that made her heart skip beats. She'd forgotten it could skip. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in her garden, picking the last of the autumn vegetables. The roof had been repaired, the debts paid, and she had started her new position at the mine office just 3 days earlier. Her supervisor, Mr. Henderson, had praised her neat handwriting and quick mind, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt useful, valuable, but more than that, she felt hopeful. Every time she heard hoofbeats on the road, her heart would jump, wondering if this time it would be Jake. She had planned a dozen meals in her head, practiced stories of her own to share, and worn a path in the porch boards from pacing. The sound of a familiar whinny made her look up from her beans. There, coming up the road in the golden afternoon light, was Jake Sullivan on his faithful horse Dusty. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 3 other men, their horses loaded with supplies and their faces bearing the weathered look of long trail travelers. Sarah's heart sank. Had Jake brought friends? Did this mean he wouldn't have time to stay? To talk? To? "Sarah!" Jake called out, waving his hat in greeting. His smile was brighter than the autumn sun. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and walked to meet them, trying to hide her disappointment. Jake dismounted quickly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You look wonderful," he said softly, for her ears alone. "Happy? Rested?" Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I am. The job is wonderful. And the money." She gestured to the new shingles, the repaired fence. "It's made all the difference. I'm glad." Jake's eyes were tender, but then he seemed to remember his companions. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. This here's Tom Bradley, Sam Morrison, and Jim Patterson. They're good men, and they've got a proposition for you." Sarah looked at the 3 strangers with confusion. Tom Bradley, a tall man with kind eyes and silver at his temples, dismounted and removed his hat politely. "Mrs. McKenna, Jake's told us a lot about you. About your kindness, your intelligence, and your new position at the mine office." "Has he?" Sarah shot Jake a questioning look, but his expression was unreadable. "Ma'am," Sam Morrison spoke up, a stocky man with calloused hands and an honest face. "We represent a group of investors from Denver. We're looking to establish a new settlement about 50 miles north of here, near the new railroad line. We need someone to manage the town's finances, keep the books, handle correspondence." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "I don't understand." Jim Patterson, the youngest of the 3, grinned widely. "What they're trying to say, ma'am, is that we'd like to offer you a job. A real job, with a real salary and a house of your own in a growing town. The position pays twice what the mine offers," Tom Bradley added. "And there would be other opportunities, maybe a school to run eventually. Or a library. Jake says you love books." Sarah looked at Jake, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You told them about me?" Jake nodded slowly. "I told them about a remarkable woman who deserved better than keeping books in a dying mining town. I told them about someone with imagination and kindness who could help build something new, something lasting." Sarah's mind reeled. A new town, a new start, opportunities she'd never dreamed of. "But, Jake, what about? I mean, you said you'd be coming through Willow Creek." Jake's smile was soft and full of promise. "Sarah, the new town needs a mail carrier too. Someone who knows the territory, who can establish regular routes to all the surrounding settlements." He paused, his eyes twinkling. "The position comes with a house right next to the town's financial manager. If she's interested, that island." Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "You're saying?" "I'm saying that maybe it's time for both of us to stop wandering. Maybe it's time to build something together, a town, a life, a future full of laughter and stories and all the possibilities we can imagine." Sarah looked around at her little homestead, at the place where she'd spent 22 years as Thomas McKenna's quiet wife. Then she looked at Jake, at his kind eyes and crooked smile and the promise of adventure and companionship and love. She thought about his stories, about acts of kindness that multiplied like ripples in a pond, about unexpected rewards for simple generosity. She had offered water to a stranger and received in return not just hope and laughter, but a whole new life. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'm very interested." Jake's whoop of joy scattered a flock of meadowlarks from the nearby cottonwoods. He swept Sarah up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed that beautiful laugh that had captured his heart 2 weeks ago and changed both their lives forever. As her feet touched the ground again, Sarah realized that her new life wasn't starting in some distant town. It had started that first evening when she chose kindness over caution, when she offered hospitality to a stranger and opened her heart to the possibility of joy. The sun was setting over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. But Sarah McKenna wasn't watching the sunset anymore. She was looking ahead, toward a horizon bright with promise, her hand in Jake's and her heart full of laughter and love and all the stories yet to be told. In the distance, a meadowlark called its sweet song, and this time, it didn't sound lonesome at all.